You might be wondering, how come I'm doing a voiceover? Simply because, at this point while working on the computer, I got into the zone. You know that zone, when you just start building and you don't think. And also I was listening to some of my favorite Japanese pop music from the 80s. You wouldn't understand hits like this. It soothes my broken, dark, and hollow soul. I better stop before I get hit with a copyright strike. You know how this sort of thing is. So right now I'm just putting in the spacers, razors, whatever the hell you want to call them. I never really learned the official name, but I'm sure somebody will get in the comment section and go, "It's called this, you stupid son of a bitch." And it's like, yeah, well, what does it matter? You ever been in a garage with a guy who knew cars but didn't know the parts? They're like, "Pass me that thing that clips on and squeezes." And you're like, "What, dude? A monkey wrench? That thing over there, you idiot." And it didn't matter, he didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. He knew what the fuck he was doing. And that's what America needs more of. Men that don't know what the fuck they're talking about, but they know what they're doing. Unfortunately, we have a man running the country who doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about or what the fuck he's doing. I fucking hate you, you left liberal scumbag. Currently, I'm working on putting in the motherboard first. Most people complain you're supposed to put in the motherboard with the cooler and the RAM first. I decided to go this way this time. Why? I knew that what I was doing, I would require to have it inside the case first, because negotiating the cooler with not that much, like there's clearance in the Cooler Master Maker 5T, but there's not that much clearance that if I put the cooler in, I'd have the freedom to figure out exactly where I wanted it. And on top of that, you know, fuck it, just trust me. I'm a professional douchebag. They don't make them like me anymore. Hold on, I need more inspiration. Mukoto, you'd never understood how I felt. Go men decide. What a fucking weeb. Ah, great. Now I've ruined it. I'm gonna start listening to that all day. No, I'm supposed to be explaining what the hell I'm doing, but really, if you're on my channel and you know anything about computers, you really don't need me to explain putting in the motherboard, having the spacers or razors, then putting the screws in for the motherboard. No big whoop-de-snip will do, you know what I'm saying? Next up, we have the Thermaltake, what the hell is it? Water 3.0 or something like that. It's actually not bad, since I love RGBs. But overall, it doesn't cover the Threadripper that great. And you might notice that I have a habit of trying to open everything as neatly as possible. Why, I don't know. I do this with my mail, dude, as if I'm gonna send the mail back. It must be some sort of form of like OCD or some shit, you know what I'm saying? So far, the funny thing is I find the rad for this 140mm to be thinner than a Cooler Master counterpart, which is quite interesting to me. I would assume they'd all be the same size. The usual sort of fans, static pressure. The only thing I could say right now that I'm noticing is the RGB. Can I tell an honest-to-God difference between the Cooler Master stock fans and the Thermaltake fans? Not really, but I will say that the Thermaltakes have like these rubber grommets built in that minimize vibrating sounds and everything. In fact, it's incredibly quiet. There's extra bags of like parts for AM3 Plus and probably 1151, quite possibly 1150 as well. Not 100% sure, but it does support a great number of things. It also supports AM4, by the way. But there's no need for all of this because thankfully Threadripper comes with its own bundled cooler adapter that seems to work with a great many coolers actually, right out of the box. Oddly enough, this comes with a remote control, which I don't understand the thought process behind it, because if it's in your case, you'd have to open your case to press the little buttons. Unless you found a way to have it outside of your case, which I didn't do, because one, I'm lazy, and two, I could not think of a way to get it through the glass panels. I don't really like the design of that. Moving on, we're using an M2 SSD by Western Digital. Now, Western Digital, I believe, bought SanDisk. That's how they got into the solid-state disk drive market. And as someone who's owned SanDisk SSDs before, I gotta say they're not bad. They're not mind-blowing, but they're not bad. I'd say it's just as good as my expensive Samsung Evo was at a fraction of the cost with more fucking space. Anyway, I am making a mistake here as I'm using this long SSD slot up here when there's actually one directly under the little logo for the Aurora motherboard. So this was a pretty big flub up that I didn't notice until later. And at that point, I was just kind of like, fuck it. I'm not gonna like take it apart just to move this tiny SSD there after I've gone through all this cable management. But that's later on in the video, because technically I make these sort of mistakes. You don't know how many times I've taken it apart to put it back together again to get something to look a little bit nicer, or to change just one wire. Also, this is the first time I worked with an SSD that had shielding, so that's kind of interesting. Now, originally, whether you know it or not, or care, the SSD shielding sort of was a controversial thing because Linus Tech Tips was running around saying the MSI board, which was one of the first ones to have shielding, was great and it worked fantastic and flawlessly, blah, blah, blah. And it turns out the MSI boards that supported the shielding, when this was first a thing like 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, was fucking roasting people's SSDs, dude. And Linus took some flack for 5 minutes. Everybody got upset, but in typical YouTube fashion, anyone who's big on YouTube and makes a mistake, people forget and forgive so quickly it isn't funny. But if you're small, everybody wants to fucking burn you at a stake. I just thought that'd be an interesting tidbit, since we're doing this very boring part of the video where you watch me put in the SSD, which isn't exactly interesting at all. It's a lot of rigmaroling, screwing around, and then finally getting everything in place. Let's screw in that screw. I don't know how anybody does these voiceovers and makes it so professional and so sort of mellow. You know, I could never do that. I guess because I've got diarrhea of the mouth is what my teacher used to say. Now we're getting off the old thermal paste, or the OEM thermal paste from the Thermotake Water 3.2. Simply because, well, thermal paste would have been sufficient for like an AM4 socket or an Intel socket CPU. But in the terms of Threadripper, as we all know, this is a pretty big chip. We're going to have to get rid of this thermal paste because, one, it isn't enough, and that's pretty much it. Now, to get out thermal paste, if you don't have any sort of like microfiber cloth, which I was told you need, I can't remember. What I always use are coffee filters. They're readily available, they're cheap, you can always get one easily enough, and they do the job. It's not 1000% perfect in this case, which is really weird because that OEM paste really fucking stuck on that copper plating like you wouldn't believe. It's actually quite annoying trying to get this shit off. And I just kept scrubbing away like a fucking douche nugget, because what else can you do, right? After that's done and dusted, I prop my case right side up. Simply because, I don't know, for some reason I prefer doing it this way. Maybe it's easier to lay it on side, but for me personally, for some reason this just works. I don't know, different strokes for different folks. Once I put the CPU cooler on with the thermal paste, I don't want to take it off again, you know, because that's just a whole shit ton of mess, and that's the last thing I want to do. I want to make sure that when I put in the CPU, it's not moving. So moving the radiator is less of a headache in my personal opinion. Some might agree, some might disagree, but this is just my method of thinking. And I like to use gravity to basically keep this screw somewhat in place. When you put it on the side, you gotta hold the radiator, you gotta put this screw in, then you gotta try and screw it in without it just falling over. Whereas with gravity on my side, I put the radiator where I want, the screw's just sitting in a little hole, you line up the hole of the rad, you twist a screwdriver, you're done. And I guess this seems as good a place as any to sort of cut this short, because I have other obligations. I'm being forced to go to the Cheesecake Factory. I don't want to go. I don't care. I hate it. Why me? So, yeah, I gotta do that. I don't know if I should take these voiceovers seriously or just sort of BS around, which I'm beginning to think I should. It's frankly, like, why should I take this seriously? It's just a computer build. It's not rocket science. It isn't something that's going to change someone's life, you know, like I saw Gundam build a computer and then I knew anything was possible, especially if this idiot could build a computer and not have it explode. I then cured cancer. Nah, well, that should do it for me. You know the whole spiel. I can actually give more of a shit than me about anything. Rate, comment, subscribe if you so choose to. If not, the hell with it. Screw it, whatever. You want to share this, you go right ahead, even though I don't know if anybody want to watch this. You know, I'm not Jay's 2 cents. I can't sit there, put this together and, you know, not say something dirty. Today is a bad day. It's been a bad week for me. My favorite porn blog was taken down. I don't know about you and how you deal with loss, but for me this was a killing blow to my soul. Oh God, this is too much. I shouldn't tell people this stuff.